All right, friend and foe, welcome back to Council and Mike. Kind of contradict classical Trinitarianism. All right, Jake, it's good to see you, man.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm doing good.
That was really interesting.
There's some attacks on classical Trinitarianism, and they're always not in the case of this particular brother. He believes Jesus is God. So to be clear, I don't want to misrepresent anybody, but most people who attack classical Trinitarianism, an attack on Trinitarianism is usually a backdoor attack on the deity of Christ.
Yeah.
But it's like if you say Jesus is not God, that spooks too many people. So a lot of people kind of like come from the back door, and then they attack the Trinity. And if you can disprove the Trinity, then derivatively you can actually start contradicting the deity of Christ.
Well, funnily enough, I wasn't going to try and contradict anyone, but I did have a question for you, and this is from a literature perspective more than a theological perspective. Obviously, I know that you're not going to be able to separate literature from theology, but
I can still mentally do it. I'll let you ask the question, and I'll tell you why we still can as Christians.
Okay. Because I'm just interested in how things are put together. That's my chief interest here. Now, am I right in thinking that the earliest and closest source would be the letters from Paul?
For
the closest first-hand source to Jesus historically?
No, it would be the apostles. It would be the likes of Matthew, Mark.
Okay, and the Roman entries from, was it Josephus and Tacitus, I think, something like that, where they mentioned.
Josephus is after Paul.
He's afterwards, is he?
Yeah, because we know this because Josephus Josephus is the leader of a Jewish contingent fighting against the Roman invasion. Well, the Romans were already there, but you remember there was a rebellion in 66 AD, right? Okay, and then he loses, but then he kind of goes on the side of Rome, and then he writes about the Roman destruction of the temple. Okay. Paul's writing, the temple is still standing.
Okay, right.
So Paul's writing before 70 AD.
Okay, so these are relatively close to the time of Jesus. So it's, what, 30 years or so?
Yes.
So we can call these first-hand accounts. We can say that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they're contemporaneous witnesses. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Now, if we're looking at it from an archaeological perspective, do you know when the earliest copies are that we've got of those texts? Because I'm guessing we don't have the original ones, so we've probably got something that's been copied over generations.
Yeah, let me pull out my manuscript notes, so I can give you something very specific rather than just ballpark it.
Good. I like to have real figures. That's bro. We do, us academics. We do.
Right.
We're sticklers for that.
That's right.
So I'm just interested in seeing whether or not there is a literary gap, because if there is there the possibility that there could have been changes? Is where I'm going with this. If you see what I mean.
No, and this is not even amongst like a lot of secular textual critics, that's not even an issue. The historical groundwork of and the reliability of the New Testament text as it stands with us today is beyond question. Nobody even takes a crack at that.
Well, good.
Yeah. So let me show. We've got. All right. So as far as Greek manuscript, this is as of 2017. My information. Okay.
Yeah.
So as far as of 2017, we've got 5,586 Greek manuscripts. The earliest is from 130 AD.
Yeah.
And that's called the John Rylands Papyrus, P52.
Yeah.
And then we've got non-Greek manuscripts in the order of 18,000 plus. So we've got a total of 24,000 manuscripts. But we've got manuscripts from early 2nd century.
Early 2nd century. Wow. Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah.
So I'll give you, I'm going to share, I think you'd enjoy this. Let me show it with you here.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. I wanted to see if there's any of these old copies. Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
So if anybody, it's kind of let's see here. The degree of accuracy of the copies is greater for the New Testament than for other books that can be compared. Most books do not survive with enough manuscripts to make comparison even possible.
Yeah.
Okay, so if anybody's going to challenge the reliability of the textual tradition of the Bible and the New Testament, then everything else has to be questioned and fall. So the black bar, the horizontal bar would be, let me zoom in, I think it'll be easier for you. There's a legend at the bottom. The black is time gap in years, and then the gray bar is number of manuscripts, copies. And this is done by a whole bunch of scholars, so I can give you the references for what I'm showing you. So it's not something I came up with.
Conclusive in my opinion.
Yeah. So let's go like this. So the New Testament, there's 25-year gap between the events and the earliest writings. And then the gray bar, we've got 5,750. And that's kind of a little misleading because that's just in Greek. Yeah. Really, we've got 24,000. So that bar should be about 4 times longer.
Well, you kind of anticipated a question I had there, which was, it was originally written in ancient Greek, I think. Is that right? And then it was translated.
So not all of it. This is kind of a little bit of a misconception. Yeah, a little bit of a misconception. So it's kind of the simple answer to say that the original autographs are Greek, but we don't believe that. So I'll give you, for example, there's some early church fathers that state multiple ones that state that Matthew wrote his original gospel in Hebrew, which is to be expected because Matthew is the most nationalistic of the gospels. He's writing to a bunch of Jews, so you'd expect him to write in Hebrew. I have a real hard time imagining Paul writing to Rome in Greek. I think he would have written to Rome in Latin.
Yes.
So it's a bit like me, if I were to send an official letter to Quebec City, I'm not sending it in English, even though that's a common language. I'm sending it in French,
Yeah.
Yeah. And we know that those are like so we know that Greek and Latin were being used simultaneously. One of the ways we know is because the superscription on top of the crucifixion of the cross of Christ, this is Jesus Christ, this is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews, was written in Latin and Greek and Hebrew.
Okay.
Right. So, and then you've got like Galatians could have been penned in some kind of particular Gaulish dialect, but definitely Greek takes over because it's the lingua franca of the first century world. Yeah,
absolutely. So in that regard, then we've got, I say we, but there is a collective massive body of scripture dating back to the 1st century, and we can compare the text from then with today. We can see the textual consistency and the accuracy of the translation has been consistent for 2,000 years.
Yeah. So we've got, like, if you look at the Homer is the second most established. We've got 643 manuscripts, but it's written 500 years after the events. Plato, that almost everybody swears by, we've got 7. Only 7 manuscripts.
Wow.
And it's written 1,200 years after the events. So Pliny, we've got 7. Caesar, we've got 10. Herodotus, the father of modern history, 8. The New Testament's got 5,750. This is, again, just in Greek. I don't know why they didn't put all the languages in there. This is just in Greek.
Well, it reminded me of when I was doing my degree. I studied Arthurian literature for a while. And one of the things we learned was that the earliest source was from, I think, 7th century. And it was just one line that said something like Arthur, King of the Britons. And then this...
Was it Bede? Was the source Bede?
Yeah, it was, yeah. And then there was another one a bit later from Geoffrey of Monmouth. I think it was a few hundred years later, but yeah, it was Bede. Yeah, that's right. Well remembered.
Thank you.
Now, what's interesting about that, though, is that the myth itself, as we know it today, didn't actually come into being until the Victorian age with Tennyson and the Idylls of the King. So in that regard, you've got a historical event that through oral retellings then transforms over time until it's formalized 1,000 years later. And so in terms of literature, we can see there something that's gone from being a real figure, probably, who's become now this sort of an icon of the country, a national myth. And what's interesting is that that is not at all what you have within the construction of the Bible. And this is where, when I've heard people try and talk about or try and dismissing the text, they will. Well, you know all the arguments they usually use. It's it's a variety of things and all that, but I can't see that would be possible if we've got the sources that go back that far and there is that consistency. Then I don't really see that there's an argument against it, as there would be for saying King Arthur wasn't who you say he is.
Oh no, yeah, we're not. We're not even the same world when it comes to that stuff. I want to read you something I think you'll find fascinating, especially with your background. Let me pull it out. That's a quote by C.S. Lewis, who was an expert scholar on texts and the nature of literature and myths and legends, historical narratives.
The screw tape.
Pull it out for yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was sure I had that. Let me see that.
I used to get a lift into work in the morning from the head of music, and he was a member of the Salvation Army, and so he used to teach me about the Bible in the mornings, and I always enjoyed it.
Really?
Yeah. Because he used to read every night, you see, so I'd always ask him. My first question was, "What book did you read last night?"
Cool.
And I always tried to see if I could catch him out to say that there was a book he didn't like, and I got him one day. It was Numbers. He's not a fan of numbers.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got it here. It's a little long, so I'm going to focus in on one particular passage that I recall. Let's see. Okay. So the undermining of the old. Let me kind of. This is fascinating enough to read, and Lewis was an excellent writer.
Yeah.
The undermining of the old orthodoxy has been mainly the work of divines engaged in New Testament criticism. The authority of experts in that discipline is the authority in deference to whom we are asked to give up a huge mass of beliefs shared in common by the early church, the fathers, the Middle Ages, the Reformers, and even the 19th century. So I don't know how familiar you are, but like in Germany in the 19th century, that's kind of where textual criticism was born. It began with the Bible, and the idea was we're going to bring a purely rationalistic approach to the Bible. We're going to try to analyze it and dissect it the way we would any other book.
Oh no, that's interesting, because I've not heard that before. I've always been taught that it came through the Marxist thinking, which tells you a lot about how we're taught in universities.
Yeah, well, in academia, it's Germany. It's definitely in Germany. Now, I don't know if I'd have to check those guys. I don't know if like the likes of Bengal and others had some kind of communistic leanings. I don't know, but worth looking into.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he says
that is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give you the names. Do I still have that? I think I've got them. Yeah, so that's it. That's the only place I got it. I got it somewhere else. Bengal, Griesbach. 18th century German scholars. Not 19th century, forgive me, 18th century German scholars.
So yeah, that would predate it by quite some considerable distance then. Yeah, maybe they were influenced by that then, perhaps.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so except though they were doing it to destroy the Western society and the fundamentals of capitalism, which of course is not what guys were doing. Not
wittingly. But I think what they did is because the undergirding framework of the freedoms of the West is the Judeo-Christian value system. Once you kind of shoot the basis for your value system, you basically have destroyed your foundations unwittingly. The two, I always thought it was weird. Like I was a university student at the American University of Beirut, and the Americans would spend a lot of money to send teachers. And there was a lot of think tanks down there. I was recruited actually by one as a university student in Beirut for a while. And they were, back then, it was very much like the neocon kind of thinking and like pushing the ideals of liberalism, well, liberal democracy in the sense of liberal democracy, right? And they were trying to like plant this in the Middle East. And those guys just couldn't get it through their head that you think those things are valuable because your worldview, it's a bizarre thing, because the people who are preaching to us all the time about cultural relativism and like my truth is not your truth, still assumed that everybody loved freedom like they did, and everybody believed in freedom of expression like they did, not realizing that the only reason why you grew up in that environment is because of the Judeo-Christian value system. And you literally have people, Muslims, who walk down the streets with signs saying, death to freedom. You can't bring in a liberal democracy into an environment in which it cannot thrive. In fact, toxic to it.
Well, funny you should mention that, as I have written a piece about this, and the way I framed it is that it's a clash of two operating systems. So precisely what you were just saying. And I was using the analogy of, like two computer operating systems. And if that happens, then how one of them can take over by weakening the other one. And I think the West, and perhaps it did begin with this here, but the West has gradually chipped away at its own identity and stripped it of it in the sake of overcompensating, as we've said before, for the Second World War. That it's got a sort of crisis of confidence now, and that's why it's vulnerable at the moment, I think.
Correct. So C.S. Lewis goes on to say, I want to explain what it is that makes me skeptical about this authority. So the people who want to question the textual authority of New Testament works. Ignorantly skeptical, as you will all too easily see. But the skepticism is the father of the ignorance. It is hard to persevere in a close study when you can work up no prima facie confidence in your teachers. So he's actually distrusting his teachers. First, then, whatever these men may be as biblical critics, I distrust them.
You don't see that in all religions, do you?
Yeah, right. How come I can't highlight anymore? I don't know what's going on with my computer. Anyway, I distrust them as critics. They seem to me to lack literary judgment, to be imperceptive about the very quality of the texts they are reading. It sounds a strange charge to bring against men who have been steeped in those books all their lives. And this he really nails it here, okay? So, and basically, the very weakness of those people is that they're nothing more than bespectacled pen pushers in an air-conditioned office, and they become disconnected from reality, and that actually skews the way you're reading the texts. You know?
And they don't have the life experience either. If that's all they're used to, they're living within an echo chamber of academics, really.
Correct. Let me go back. My screen's kind of freezing a little bit.
I'm sure there was it C.S. Lewis that this chap who I used to get the lift with told me about? Didn't he get really angry in a church one day and shout about something? Or am I thinking of someone completely different?
I don't know. I know the Lord got angry in the temple at one point and whipped him, but
yes.
Yeah. So let me read this here to you. Okay, so he says, but that might just be the trouble, that they're steeped in those books all their lives. A man who has spent his youth and manhood in the minute study of New Testament texts and of other people's studies of them, whose literary experiences of those texts lacks any standard of comparison, such as can only grow from a wide and deep and genial experience of literature in general, is, I should think, very likely to miss the obvious things about them. If he tells me that something in a gospel is legend or romance, I want to know how many legends and romances he has read, how well his palate is trained in detecting them by the flavor, not how many years he has spent on that gospel.
No, that's a really interesting and good quote. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. And I would definitely say that being from a literature background, looking at what I know of the New Testament, obviously I haven't read it in its entirety, and I haven't read bits of it for a while, but looking at it in terms of textual integrity compared with a romance like King Arthur, there is no comparison. The only thing I could possibly say in terms of the composition of the literature where you could make a comparison is with the historical sources and with them being quite limited. But I would say that you even there you've got more than you've got for Alexander the Great, for example. So and like you mentioned before, which I wasn't aware of, Plato. There's absolutely no way you can connect that directly to Plato.
No. So that's a good point you raised. Let me address this. I just want to hit something quick. Calvin says Lewis leaned towards occultism even during his latter years per his own writings. This can easily be learned by reading his writings and biographies. Okay, so that's true. But one thing to keep in mind, especially for like King James Bible believers, actually, his work in questioning critics is beyond criticism. He did a great job. I know that Lewis had some weird things. I don't like the approach where it's like it's all or nothing with people. It's undeniable that Lewis was a great scholar, and he actually fought a la Dean Burgeon, the way Dean Burgeon does in the 19th century. He actually pushed back against the liberal critics that wanted to look at the Bible strictly through a kind of rationalistic eyes and humanistic approach. So he did really good work there, as you can see. Yeah. So now, as far as something that happens, we don't even notice happens when we talk about historical, kind of extra biblical, historical testimonies to the events and peoples of the Bible. Okay, in a way, it's almost like there's a sample bias that we're not even aware of, and I'll tell you why. Because so the Bible is not one book; it's 66 books, right? Okay, the New Testament is not one book; it's 27 books that are collated together. You've got four Gospels.
Just mention this. Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to mention there that when I hear some people talk about other forms of worship with other belief systems, they quite often mention the fact that there's one book and that it's been consistent. Now, one book coming from one source compared with 66 books combining to create one source, there's a big difference there in terms of how we're looking at this.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Tolkien, writes sprawling, and it really invents an entire world, right? Across like hundreds of pages, and his plot holes you have to think hard to find a plot hole. Right? But it's it's like, can the eagles take the ring? Why don't the eagles of Gondor take the ring and drop it in the volcano? Kind of like plot holes, people ask, so it's achievable. That's why, like Muhammad saying, try to do a Quran. Look at what Tolkien did. It blows the Quran out of the water. Right.
Well, actually, that is a really interesting from a literary perspective. Yes, I would say absolutely, because I can't think who it was, but some critic I was reading the other day that said that the Quran was unreadable as a text. I mean, I don't know, I've never read it, but that's what they said. And they went on to explain that it's because it's not in chronological order, bits of it need to be explained and this kind of thing. Whereas my understanding is that with the New Testament, certainly even as a child, I was reading it, so you don't need to have that.
Right.
That level.
I think the scholar you have in mind that you're quoting is a Dutch scholar who studied the Sana manuscript that was of the Quran, and he basically says every fifth line of the Quran is unintelligible.
Yes, that was in. Yeah. That was the one. You're very good at this. Very good.
Well, it's my life's work. I know why I trust the Bible. I'm betting my soul on the Bible, right? So I want to know what I'm trusting in.
Absolutely.
So my faith has done nothing but grow. And look, I've got an open mic, so we take on challenges. I got no issues with this. The God of the Bible says, "Produce your strong reasons. Come and let us reason together." So the God of the Bible is not afraid of questions. So the reason why I say there's a kind of we have a biased sample of extra biblical literature is precisely because of that descriptor, extra biblical. So what we've done is, so forget about the Bible in a second. I have a contemporaneous account in a historian called Luke. I've got a contemporaneous account in a historian called Mark. Yeah. So let's not think of them as Christians. I've got a contemporaneous account in a historian called John. I've got a contemporaneous account in a historian called Matthew. Plus, I've got Paul writing, and I've got Peter writing, and I've got Jude writing. So, and I've got James, the Lord's brother, writing. So you've got basically 8 first-century authors that are writing about this. So you could kind of step away and say, well, I've got these 8. But what we've done is we've taken these 8, we put them together. We call this the New Testament body of work. That's kind of, and somehow we count this outside the sample. Yeah, but that is the sample. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand.
That is a sample. Now, the longer we look and we study, the more we've got what is now called extra biblical sources that are confirming the existence of even New Testament work. Gallio, we've got archaeological proof for Gallio. We've got for Quirinius, which for a long time, by the way, I think Quirinius, we didn't even know of him till the 19th century. When Luke says there was a taxing, a census in the days of the birth of Christ by Quirinius, the governor, and the King James he's called Cyrenius with a C, right? And then we discovered that he does exist in the 19th century. Pilate is referenced,
Yeah.
right? Of course, Josephus referenced him, and some others also. I think I'd have to remember serves right. Pliny or something like that talks about him. So the longer we live, Sargon was denied to have existed as a king of Assyria. He's mentioned in Isaiah, and again, 19th century digs. Oh, there was a Sargon.
Yeah.
So everything, the longer we dig, the more there is confirmation for the historical basis for trusting the Bible on a historical basis.
And historically, we've also now got Göbekli Tepe, which completely pushed back our knowledge of when we became civilized entirely.
They you know that they've closed it down, huh?
I heard they excavated a tiny bit of it, and
they're going to stop there.
Why?
Well, that's the big question. So, what's the guy's name? The kind of fringe archaeologist. I mean, fringe.
Yes, I know the guy you mean, Graham Hancock.
You're right. He goes on Joe Rogan. So, and others. And that's kind of what they were trying to discuss. They're like, why would you do that? Well, to preserve the site for tourism. Yeah, but like, the longer we're digging, the more everybody's becoming ashamed because. And now they're placing it at 11,000 BC, and they're building megalithic. Well, yeah, some of the structures could be megalithic. So,
yeah. No, it's very interesting because I've always thought, just on a slight tangent here, but I've always thought that there is, if we look at the date of the cave paintings that we have, which were from about 30,000 years ago, and then when we've got our first recorded writing, we have got tens of thousands of years there where it's perfectly possible that there are lots and lots of scripts that have simply been lost or could possibly have been stored somewhere and are yet to be found. And that could push back our sort of knowledge of language a few thousand years, which I think is an interesting thing.
So this is where probably I'm going to jar you a little bit because I'm a Bible literalist. And so if I go by my Bible, mankind is only 6,000 years old.
Right.
So I don't know how old the earth. And here's some people even would disagree with me because so Gregory, if you want to come on without turning on the camera, I prefer if you turn it on. It's a lot more fun. But if you want for a first time, come on in. If you turn on the camera and you look like the icon, I think it'd be pretty cool. But don't worry about it. If you want to come on without the camera, that's okay. Just click the link and we'll add you to the conversation. Anybody else that's listening to, if you want to jump in, you can come in. So as far as, so I'll throw this at you. Okay, so here's the biblical account. God creates the angels first. So there are the original creation, not us.
Right. Okay.
It's the angels. Okay.
Yep.
And then at some point, something goes wrong. We're not exactly sure. The Bible doesn't go too much into it, but it seems that Lucifer rebels, the Satan rebels.
The war in heaven that Milton wrote about.
Right. Yeah.
Later.
So yeah. Right. Yeah. So Milton kind of like, he weaves all kinds of things together. He's writing a poem, so a lot of the stuff is not biblically accurate, but yeah, you kind of get the idea.
Yeah.
And this notion you find in like all the civilization that before man, I'm talking about before like Noah's flood, even something terrible went on. So there's a rebellion.
Yes.
God, and it seems that Satan's Earth was basically the crown jewel of the universe, and his base of operations was here, the dominion that God had assigned him. Okay, so he rebels, so God like destroys the whole thing, and the 6 days are 6 days of recreation.
Right.
And so he replaces Lucifer with Adam, who's made of dust. And that's kind of partly why Satan hates us so much, because you know what you hate more than anything? If your boss fires you and he replaces you with a guy less competent than you are.
Especially when you're already egotistical.
Right. All you want the guy to do, your replacement, is to fail so you can shove it in your boss's face, right? So that's kind of the dynamic that we get. Now, to be clear, a lot of Christians would not agree with me. They're saying, no. Angels and men were created together. And then it's just, yes, Lucifer fell first, but very briefly, like a matter of a few years before.
Okay.
So just to be clear, I don't want to be dishonest. I don't want to give you the impression that all the Christians agree with how I see it, but a whole bunch of people see it the way I see it.
Well, this is where for me it gets interesting, because we're talking about the New Testament before there's no argument there as far as I'm concerned from a literary perspective. When we're looking back to the Old Testament, that's where I think we can start looking at some mythical elements perhaps that have come in, like, for example, the flood myth is something that we have in is it Sumerian literature, and many other cultures as well. It's not something that's specific to that, and I wondered how much of the Old Testament comes from various other cultures or myths, or has that always had a consistent history as well through the Torah?
Okay, that's an excellent question. You're
Sorry, it was a very long question.
No, it's okay. It's fine. So just to kind of resume the history. So
Yes.
So that's why I say we don't know how old Earth is. Okay. Now, for the record, so nobody misrepresents me, that doesn't mean that I believe the Earth is billions of years old either, because I don't agree with the science that says it's billions of years old. Okay. But all I'm committing to is I don't know how old the Earth is.
Yeah.
But I don't believe it's billions of years old. Now, for some people, they say, well, yeah, it is billions of, even some Christians, they say that's why the Earth is so old, because Lucifer fell so long ago. I don't believe that. Okay. Now, God recreates Adam and Eve in about 6,000 BC, but then you've got the flood that wipes out humanity in about 2,500 BC.
Yeah.
So, which would mean that basically all civilizations that we have direct evidence of cannot be older than 2,500 BC. What's interesting here is that so you can correct me because you're probably more up to date on that stuff than I am. But when I was in school, we were constantly taught that that the oldest writings that we have go to about 2,000, 2,500 BC.
Yeah, that is what I was told.
Right, and that was the demarcation line between what we used to call prehistory and history.
Yeah.
So prehistory was before writing, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, that is essentially what we mean by civilization. Yes.
Right. The invention of writing. So that kind of, I thought it was cool because it kind of lined up with the biblical chronology. Now, as far as like, and we can come back to that, but let me show you a comparison between the flood of Noah and like something like the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in, is seeing whether or not there has been a transfer of myth that has then, perhaps through oral retellings, been modified over time.
Okay,
so it's not to debunk anything, by the way. It's just purely out of my own interest.
No, I understand. I really get the sense from you that you're somebody who's like sincerely just trying to figure out what's what, and like more power to you, because
I just like to learn, and I like to ask questions.
Well, yeah, everything has to be double checked. What I like to remind my skeptical friends is to be consistent. One has to also be skeptical of skepticism, because even skepticism can be pushed too far and it becomes a default position. So it's like somebody who relies on his reason perfectly, even though his own reason tells him that it's not perfect itself. Where's that thing?
Because in terms of our archaeology of the literature, now we're at a point where we're not going to have the scripture to show how it has been across time. So I'd just be interested in that area. But I can see Rory's there. Hello, Rory.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm good. Are you, by any chance, historian? Are you interested in history?
I'm originally from a literature background, but now I've branched out into, I suppose, multidisciplinary, and I'm more into the history, the social aspect, the cultural, and the literary aspect, if that helps.
Cool. Hi, George. How you doing?
Hey, Rory. How are you?
Good.
I had a table. I just had it. I was showing it on a podcast not long ago. I just have so many. I've got 900 pages in my notes in Genesis, so
it's always
it takes me a while to pull it out.
Whenever you want something and you think you know where it is, you can't find it.
Yeah, it's just so annoying, man.
Because to be honest, I don't really know anything about the creation of the Old Testament or its what's it called, heritage and legacy. I know nothing about that, and I only knew a little bit about the New Testament. So I'm glad to have learnt more this evening. So thank you.
Cool. If you guys want to chat while I pull it out, go ahead. I'll try to pull it out. If you guys want to join, I can have 2 more people on there. So here we go. We'll add this link. You guys click that. Let me find that table.
You must have been exposed to it, Jake, when you were in school. RE.
Yeah. I went to a Catholic primary school, so I was exposed to it every Thursday.
You do know what RE stands for, right?
Yeah. But we didn't learn about where the actual books, where they came from. We didn't learn about how old they were. We just learned the stories. And so I'm just interested in, well, where do these stories come from? And how have they been preserved over time? And have there been any alterations, for example? Because if there have, well, who made them? For what purpose did they make them? And that's one way in which, the text that it was back then, today, could be slightly different. So I think it's important to see why that might be, if that's happened, which in the New Testament, as we've just seen, you can't say that there's been any changes because there haven't. There's a consistent history that's there. I'm sure there's the odd word or passage here and there that gets disputed now and again, but it's a solid history that's there. But the Old Testament, that I don't know. Do you know, Rory?
You mean the Tanakh?
Yeah.
Well, all I know is the Old Testament, well, the oracles of the Jews, right?
Yeah.
And the New Testament says the oracles of the Jews were for our learning.
Okay.
Well, when I mean ours, I mean believers.
I have to confess here, when I was at school, I much preferred the Old Testament to the New Testament because I thought that the stories were just much more exciting. I don't know about you, but I loved the parting of the Red Sea, and I loved the plagues in Egypt. They were just such vivid literary narratives that they stay with you. I mean, the New Testament has its moments as well, of course. I mean, it's got a very strong leading character, for one.
Have you heard of this?
I have heard of that, and I was going to ask George about that.
Oh, yeah, George. I watched your video on the missing books of the Bible.
Yes.
I thought it was awesome. I didn't know passages like where Jesus mentions the canons of the Bible were there. Well, actually, I did know because he does say concerning the Torah, the law, the prophets, and the Psalms, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Cool shades, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to drive me nuts. I don't know how I can't find it, so I just chat GPT'd it.
That's fine.
But just to show how
GPT is quite good if you give it the right prompt.
Correct. Yeah. I want to show you, Jake, just to see how maniacal I am about those things. Let me give me a second.
Okay. So, could they be borrowed from one another? There's one big difference. One God.
You see this?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a scholarly brick.
That's a book.
That cost me a pretty penny. This is like, you know what? This is a partial anthology of Sumerian literature.
Is it really? Wow.
Yeah, a partial one. And I actually do read it. Okay. So I'm showing you this to show you this is not just Chat GPT.
Yeah, no,
but
I take the word of Chat GPT regularly. I know that it does come up with the right stuff.
Right.
What I noticed here, the first thing that stood out is the move to monotheism. That I think is the big difference.
Yeah, so let's go through them because even so, yeah, you can read that. Let me show you. I want to show you guys one other book. I'll be right back.
Are you talking about the Samaritan flood of Noah version of it? Samaritans and Jews were. Have you heard about the Good Samaritans? The Samaritans and Jews were enemies.
Yeah, they were.
But the question is, where is Samaria?
So that is a very good question. I don't know. I would have said is it Iraq, Iran, somewhere around there?
No, Samaria is in Israel. So this is echoes of Ararat. Yeah. So when we ask the question, like if it was borrowed, that's a good question, fair question to ask, but there needs to be the nuance of understanding the environment.
Yes.
So here's what you have as a setup. At least this is the setup, and this is like we agree this is kind of the setup. Okay. Well, most of us agree it's the setup. So, but let's posit that we do accept Noah's flood for a second. Let's posit it. Okay. So let's say, all right, there was a flood in 2500 BC. 8 people survived. 4 couples survived. Three couples of childbearing age, and then the world is repopulated by them. So what happens according to the biblical record is Shem basically goes east, so he inherits Asia. Ham goes south, he inherits Africa. Japheth goes west, as far as we understand, and he inherits Europe. All right. Now, what you've got there at that moment, Noah may have written about the flood. I would have definitely, but as the people, according to the Bible too, the people become wicked relatively quickly. And they're scattering. And as they're scattering, there is in a lot of those cases, you're going to have a corrupted memory of the event.
Yeah.
Okay. And you probably are going to have some kind of cross-pollination, right? But you still have a kind of a base core common memory for all those civilizations.
Yeah, I have a theory about this actually, because the way the flood is presented it's a global flood, isn't it?
Yes.
But if we're talking about the area that is Israel today, it's probably far more likely to have been a localized Mediterranean flood, Mediterranean flood. So it would appear to the people there that was the entirety of the world, when in actual fact it wasn't. And so the story actually could have spread out much further in a different way, if that makes sense.
I understand the thought, but so the locus of writing is not Israel, because this is Moses. Yeah. Moses is writing coming out of Egypt. So to begin with, you're not even in Israel. Okay. And he's learned all the wisdom and knowledge of the Egyptians, as Stephen says. In the Genesis account, Genesis chapter 2, you actually get a breadth of Moses' acquaintance with geography. He mentions, so he's coming out of Egypt.
Yeah. And
he mentions Ethiopia, and he mentions the Hiddekel, which is we call today the Tigris, and he mentions Assyria, and he mentions the Euphrates, which is in modern day Iraq. So at the very least, Moses is aware as far as the eastern edge of Iraq to the southern edge of Ethiopia. He's got that in his mind.
Yeah.
So it's very hard that this guy just saw something local and went, or even the Egyptians. And the Egyptians were very much in contact with the neighboring countries. They were very much aware of them. As you know from archaeology, they've got lists of all kinds of, diplomats, not just wars with contiguous countries, but like diplomats from further countries. So it's not like those people were like stupid because they saw a local flood and they imagined it was something global.
No, absolutely. I'm thinking though that that it's older than that. That actually this is a flood that goes back much further, and then perhaps over oral retellings, it's come to be where it is today, and it's gone through different phases in the same way that any myth would, being passed
Fair.
on
Okay,
orally.
fair. That's a good fair point. I take that. But then the challenge becomes, how does a local flood translate into a common memory of pretty much all civilizations?
That's a very, very good question. Well, what I would say as in riposte to that proposition is that you would have, for example, we talk about the Battle of Britain over here, which was an aerial battle that didn't affect the whole of Britain. It was very much concentrated in the southeast of England where we fought. But through public memory, it's become associated with the entire nation, and it's become symbolic of that. And so is it possible that an event can do the same thing, and it can take on a life of its own outside of that real event?
Okay, the Battle of Britain, forgive me, the damage extended to what areas? Do you know?
The actual Battle of Britain itself
Mhm.
was mostly based around the southeast, so East Anglia and Kent.
Okay. Do you have any Brits today that believe that the Battle of Britain raged across the entire island territory of Great Britain?
I would think that if you asked the majority of school children where the Battle of Britain took place, they would say it was across the whole country.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, school children, but like if I go on the street and like you talk to, remember those are the writers who are writing about this, right?
Yeah.
So writer, especially back in the day, writer suggests a higher level of education.
Yeah.
So to make it a fair comparison, like if I go around like academicians or any today who believe that the Battle of Britain spanned the entire coasts of the island of Britain.
Academics, no. Your ordinary person on the street, yes.
Most of them would believe that?
I think they would, yes.
Okay.
Because it's
and then
a
you have to like
myth.
Okay. So like, and then you have to go for that from a few hundred years down the line, people in China are going to believe that the Battle of Britain affected China geographically.
That's an interesting proposition, yeah.
Yeah. So it's quite the leap. But one of the reasons so I believe the biblical record, actually one of the things I believe the Bible, I'll tell you what it is, the understatement. The Bible is a very understated book. People who haven't read it, they think, well, there's miracles in the Bible, therefore supernatural. You'd be surprised at how quickly the supernatural is glossed over in the Bible.
Mm.
I've read the Bible probably, to be fair, about 60 times, and I'm talking like word for word, cover to cover. And I'm still surprised at how like it's not trying hard. You know what I'm saying?
No, and in fact, if you were to compare it with the text I mentioned before, the Idylls of the King, the Arthurian legend, there you've got the supernatural is one of the core themes. I mean, it opens with a supernatural birth. So
right, yeah. So
Gregory,
the main character,
Rory, sorry, he's got a question for you.
Oh, go ahead, Rory. Sorry, I didn't see that.
It's
You guys
not a question, it's more of a statement. Of course, miracles and other supernatural events are hard to reproduce because that's the very definition of miracles. The Bible does say what is impossible for man is not impossible for God.
Right. That's right, Corey.
Yeah.
So the main character is Noah in the biblical record. It's Utnapishti in the Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
Now, what it doesn't say here that I've got in my notes is, we'll get to it. Okay, so we'll get to it. All right. So the cause of the flood is human wickedness in the Bible.
Yeah.
All right. In the Sumerian flood, it's the noise that the people were causing, and the gods couldn't sleep.
Yeah. Okay. Now, from a literary perspective, Gilgamesh is the older source, so it's perfectly possible that through oral retellings, the overpopulation and annoying the gods becomes all humans are wicked and violent. That would make perfect sense from a literary perspective.
Okay, so two things. Gilgamesh is older. We know that because
I don't know.
How do we know it's necessarily older? So Moses is about 1500 BC. This is like so Genesis 6 is about like a 1500. It's safe to say 1500 BC text.
Yeah. Gilgamesh.
So I'd be interested in how we establish that Gilgamesh is older. It could be, and I don't have a problem with that. I'm just interested.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer to that, and I never pretend to know something that I don't, and I'd have to look into
fair.
it. But my understanding is that it is about 3,000 years old. How we've established that, I don't know. I'm happy to look into that.
Okay.
But if we say that it, just hypothetically, we'll say it's slightly older. That would be
let's go with that.
Let's go with that. Fair compromise.
So usually when things get picked up, they get aggrandized.
Yes.
And embellished. They don't get toned down.
Yeah.
Okay, here it's quite the toning down from, there's going from multiple gods to one god. And it's funny because the toning down is over the silliness. Because between the two, objectively, forget it's Genesis, forget it's the Bible, because sometimes it skews our thinking because we're thinking the Bible is a religious text. But if I've got one text that talks about one supernatural power and the problem was moral, and the other one talks about multiple supernatural powers, and the problem is that the gods can't sleep. I mean, between the two, my kind of like scientific compass, I'm going to be more attracted towards the monotheistic moral account.
Of course. Absolutely. Right. Now, what I think could possibly have happened if this theory were correct, again, I don't know if it is. I've never thought of this in my entire life. I'm just coming up with this right now.
Sure.
But let's suppose that is the case. So why would there be this shift from several gods into one god? Well, I would say that was a consolidation of and way of centralizing power for whoever was in power of that region. It would make far more sense for them to take this origin myth and say, right, we're not going to complicate it as it is there. We're just going to say there's one god and everything goes through them. And whilst we're at it, I'm going to say that I'm the only person that can communicate with that god. That would be how a myth might operate. So
one of the issues I have with this kind of thinking is they can all kind of be flipped on their heads. So
yeah, sure.
You can take something that's like so if we could posit a scenario, and people who are intelligent enough could posit a scenario that would explain going from a monotheistic text to a polytheistic text, and we could come up with reasons why that would have been conducive for the authors of the polytheistic text, because I could say, well, and picking up from that kind of thinking, I could say, well, the monotheistic text, this particular tribe, this particular chief claims all authority. So I'm going to take that same text, I'm going to make it polytheistic, and now I'm going to dilute the monopoly on power that particular tribe and chief has. So that's my issue with that. Is you can play this both ways.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Plus, Moses doesn't claim for himself any kind of authority. So he's kind of like a reluctant shepherd, and that's basically what he says of his entire life. He's challenged. He had issues all the time.
So he doesn't actually. You just mentioned something really interesting then that has got me on in a different mindset. But Moses was he was just a humble kind of shepherd type.
He does end up ruling as king.
Yeah.
But so he's described as a king twice, but he doesn't even pass on, like his kids don't even inherit. Not even the priesthood, actually. Forget the kingship. His kids don't end up being kings, nor even priests. Actually, his kids, Moses' children, are barred from being priests. They have to be children of his brother Aaron.
I was just thinking that his role, his occupation sounds familiar. Sounded a bit like in another text that could perhaps be formed in the way that I'm sort of proposing here, that perhaps could have happened with some elements of this story.
I'd have to know the text, but yeah, I'd love to look at it. But let's go on with the other here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the divine motivation, God decides to cleanse the earth of corruption and start anew. In the Sumerian account, the gods are annoyed and decide to destroy. That's pretty capricious.
We've got morality introduced there.
Yes. Right.
Absolutely. Now, what I was going to
Oh.
ask, because I don't know the answer,
Which people, yeah, go ahead.
is it was just to do with the shift into monotheism. Is why did the Romans go from polytheism to monotheism? Because then we might be able to see.
I would argue that they haven't.
Oh,
I would
right.
argue that they never did.
Okay.
I don't think the Romans fully ever did go fully monotheistic, because the vestige of the Roman Empire, it remains with us today, reformulated as the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And theologically, it is monotheistic on paper. Practically, it is polytheistic. Mary is co-redemptrix with Christ. You can pray to her. You can pray to the saints. People cross themselves before the saints, the icons and the images. So I don't know that Rome ever really became monotheistic.
No, that's an interesting perspective, actually. I mean, I just wondered if for them, politically, it would have made more sense to collapse the beliefs into one God. It might have helped with centralizing power, but I'm not a classic historian, so I don't know.
So the kind of like, I see this kind of thinking with everything, really, and it's understandable. But the idea is this: is that if I can identify a benefit to a newly introduced plan, structure, theology, false military operation, then therefore I can conclude that event or theology X was pre-planned with the purpose of achieving said benefit. It's like like October 7th, the attack happens. Well, Israel now gets to occupy Gaza. Therefore, Israel must have planned the event so it can occupy Gaza.
Yeah.
So it's like, and sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's true, but like anything we do, there's going to be winners and losers.
Yeah.
And I don't know that automatically that becomes the explanation for why monotheism got introduced.
Yeah.
Like if monotheism got introduced and it did benefit somebody somehow, does that necessarily call for the conclusion that that's the reason why it was introduced? No.
Then we'd have to say no. No, it doesn't.
No, like my wife died and I collected life insurance. Well, therefore, you must have killed your wife.
Exactly.
Does it happen? Do people kill their wives for life insurance? Yes.
Yeah, but not all of them kill their wives.
Not all of them. So
exactly. So no, that is a very reasonable argument. I was going to just mention very quickly, because just whilst it was on my mind, because this is entirely mythological, is in my town there's a history, a mythological history from 1563, I think it is, where apparently during a thunderstorm, a hellhound appeared at the church in town, ran through the congregation, killed 2 people, then disappeared in a bolt of lightning and appeared at a church 10 miles away, where it ran up the church and then flew up into the sky. And it left on the door scorch marks. And that's been the story that I've always heard. So I just as I was bored one day, I looked into it and I thought, well, what's the primary source? And I found it was some bloke from London. And I thought, well, obviously he's never been here. When was it written? And it was written the same year. So that was quite interesting. That this account was presented at the time as a first-hand original account. And there are scorch marks on the door at the other church. I mean, what caused them, I don't know. But that doesn't make this myth true.
Right.
But it does mean that the story has become true with successive tellings, that through that repetition, the story then becomes true in public memory, at least in this town. Yes.
So exactly, at least in this town, what you've got here is this is, I live in Canada. Yeah. This is an account of doctors, evangelists, and just secular explorers from pretty much every native tribe from the Yukon and Northwest Territories in northern Canada to the south of the South Americans.
Wow.
And this is nothing but page after page after page of interviews and quotations a lot of it from the 17th, 18th, 19th century.
You're
And they
talking my
all-
language here.
And so they all talk about a memory of a global flood and a few people surviving. And some of them say because the people were wicked.
Uh-huh.
So,
well,
you know, that.
this suggests then.
So, yeah, let me just. I want to do something, Jay, because I want to finish those points.
Yeah,
and then-
sorry.
Well, I'll come back to you. And Gregory and Rory, if you want to jump in, like, feel free to jump in. Okay, guys, this is like you don't
my
have to.
apologies.
I'll let Gregory jump in before me because he's not said a word.
I don't even know if he's still there. Gregory, are you
He's
still there?
here.
Okay, I'll remove him from stage. Gregory, you're removed from stage. If you want to come back, let me know. So, and if you guys want to jump in and join the chat, this is really fun. I'm enjoying this.
Oh, good.
Okay,
thank
so,
you.
oh yeah, so the arc dimensions: 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 high. So a cubit would think 21 inches. I don't know if that means anything to you.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
just under 2 foot.
So, right, okay, it's huge, and and it's not cubical. This is in the Sumerian Flood. It's a cubical structure. It's 120 cubits on each side, and it's a cube in the middle of a global flood. So this is a study that was done by a non-creationist. It's a South Korean. I'll tell you his name here. His name is Dr. Hong, and it was done in 1993. In 2016, Ark Encounter in Williamstown, Kentucky, finished an all-wood full-sized Ark. I don't know if you know about this. It's in Kentucky. I visited with my kids. They built that in Kentucky, but they actually based it on some studies, and the dimensions are given in the book of Genesis. So the dimensions in the book of Genesis.
Four-story house.
Yeah, right. So you've got a triangle of tension. So it's a triangle of tension between. You could blow it up a little bit so you can see that. Ideally, a passenger carrying vessel has to strike a perfect balance between comfort, strength on the lower right end, and maximum stability on the lower left end.
Yeah.
Ideally, right? And you can kind of like there's always a cost, right? So if you go to full stability, you lose out on the strength and the comfort, and so on. Okay. So they actually they tested the biblical dimensions. They compared 12 hulls of different proportions to discover which design was most practical. And I've got the footnotes for this. No hull shape was found to significantly outperform the 4,003-year-old biblical design. In fact, the ark's careful balance is easily lost if proportions are modified, rendering the vessel either unstable, prone to fracture, or dangerously uncomfortable. The research team found that the proportions of Noah's Ark carefully balanced the conflicting demands of stability, which is resistance to capsizing, comfort, which the mariners called seakeeping, and strength. It has the same proportions as modern cargo ship, especially in the 6-to-1 ratio, length to width.
Yeah,
those are still like kind of the proportions we have today. So even the dimensions of the ark given in Genesis are basically modern day ideals. Compare that to a cubical structure, which would not survive a river, let alone a flood.
Yeah, absolutely.
40 days, the duration of the rain flood, 40 days and 40 nights, which prevail for 150 days. By the way, to be clear, Genesis doesn't say that it's just the rain. So it says it rains for 40 days and 40 nights. Plus, you've got the book of Genesis says there's an under subterranean an underground ocean. Okay, below Earth. And that busts onto the surface, which we got confirmation of, I think, last year. There was an article that the scientists believe they've discovered an enormous ocean that's bigger than all the oceans on our surface combined. So that busts out on the surface also, plus the possibility of water that comes down from space.
Yeah.
That's what you've got. Yeah, so that's what you've got. So it's not just 40 days of raining and 40 nights that you've got in biblical record.
Could it have been perhaps... I mean, if I'm just thinking, if this were a literal event here, could it sounds like it could possibly have been a tsunami and the waters were dragged backwards, in which case it might then seem like the waters are being thrown back out again. But that's purely speculation. I've got absolutely
Well, it's it says that the waters of the deep, the fountains of the deep broke up.
Okay.
They busted on the surface, and the windows of heaven were open. Plus, here's what's really interesting: is that actually Genesis says there was no rain before the flood.
Right.
So it basically Genesis says that the evaporation cycle is a result of the flood. So so to me, what's interesting is this: it's not so much whether this is true or not.
Yeah.
It's the boldness to even venture, to even come up with the idea.
Yeah.
That's what that is.
So,
okay? So I'm fascinated by to even venture that.
I'd say at the moment where we are with this, just on those points, I would say for me, it looks like it could possibly be a retelling. I don't think the distinction is huge, except for the bit about monotheism, which is huge, granted, and probably the greatest and biggest threat to that argument. But just on that part, because
there's not supposed to be a huge difference.
Yeah. But
so
we can't specifically say what happened. That's our problem.
Well, so I'm not expecting a massive difference precisely. So, okay, the fact that the differences are not chasms, actually accords with the narrative that this is something that was experienced by the fathers of all the civilizations, and later on the memory was corrupted.
Yes.
So it doesn't even have to be it could be a retelling. First, so let's grant that it's a retelling. A retelling could be somebody who knows better correcting the fable.
Yes.
Okay. Because
or perfecting it.
Or perfecting it. Granted. So far, granted.
I mean, if we took that view, then you could say, yes, it does. You could say, okay, they've taken the story of Gilgamesh, they've updated it. I'm not going to speculate why, but we could say that, yes, they've embellished it.
Well, it could be. I can take all that and say, oh, an actual global flood did happen.
Yeah.
Some people, and the memories were passed on generationally, but some people were like saying stupid stuff, and somebody that knows says, wait, I got the real deal on this, so I'm going to set the record straight. So my father is 75 years old, and he got approached a couple of years back by people who know what he's lived in the Lebanese wars, and they said, we want to interview you so you can tell us what actually went down. Because a lot of other guys and my dad did write, but their works are a little questionable because they're pretty biased. Yeah. And my father just never got around to it. And so me and his friends are trying to coax him now to like, can you sit down and tell us, because you were there. Like he literally was there, right? Mm-hmm. And some of the stuff is written by people who weren't even there.
I'd love to talk to him about it.
Yeah. So like, and some of the stuff is dangerous to say. That's why also too he's careful.
Well, no, you're right, because I remember reading a novel by, I can't remember his name, he's an Albanian writer, and the novel is called The Palace of Dreams, but it's actually about the bureaucracy and of the socialist system that was in place at the time, and how it was very similar to having a control of people's minds because they were surveilling their dreams and trying to predict behavior from it. It's an interesting book.
Yeah.
But it would have got him killed.
Right. So if my father, let's assume here, if my father does write the events as he saw them, okay, it's going to look like a retelling, and it would be a retelling, but it's not necessarily a retelling motivated by anything else than to set the record straight.
Yeah.
So even if we do prove that it's a retelling, definitely the retelling seems more veridic than the base work, if we're granting the Sumerian memory is the base work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you add to this too the release. So the Bible says a raven was released first. And there's stuff that's not even spelled out that just smacks of authenticity. So for example, it tells you the raven was released and never came back. The dove is released. She comes back with an olive leaf, and then the second time she's gone, and that's it. Now, and that's what what fascinates me with the Bible. It's kind of, I can figure out on my own why the raven doesn't come back, because the ravens feed on carrion.
Yeah,
carrion, I should say, right?
Yeah.
So they're scavengers. So it would have found all kinds of like dead organic material to feast on, and the dove would have like coming back to the ark where the source of food is until there is some kind of grain growth that the gov can live on. And then after the flood, Noah gets drunk and commits a terrible sexual sin. Well, his son perpetrates it on him. Just a terrible, disgusting stuff that's passed over euphemistically in the Bible. And you never hear about him again. Whereas in the Sumerian Flood, Utnapishti becomes a god because he's the hero. And to give you, and you know, you deal with Muslims, you've dealt with Muslims, to tell you how difficult that is to accept is one of the objections of the Muslims to the biblical records is, but your biblical records say that the prophets were like committed disgusting sins. That's impossible. Like the prophets are beyond sin. So what that tells me is that the human mind likes to elevate its heroes. It likes to elevate its people, right? Especially on the last note. You can follow a narrative like a typical arc of a character development, and they're gonna, to make the character have depth and interesting, they're gonna have some kind of crisis. They're gonna have some kind of weak point. They're gonna have the valley. But what do you know? Usually, is that the end point is good. Noah, the end point is shame.
Yeah. No,
so,
right.
Like, okay, so now you are trying to write an account and make it monotheistic because it's going to consolidate power. And the main guy you're appealing to ends up sodomized by his son?
It is a very odd detail. A very odd detail.
So you know,
I mean, I don't know why this could have happened.
I'll tell you why. Because, to me, that smacks of reality. That tells me this is somebody who really doesn't care except to communicate the truth. Because I read like you, I'm a voracious reader, and books don't write like that. Like books that are strictly written by men just don't do that. Not to their main hero.
So you're saying that because he's related this dreadful event, that makes it more real because it would have been too easy for him to have covered it up.
Right, not right. So that's a good way to put it. More real. It's not like absolutely conclusive on its own, but take them all together. The dimensions of the ark, the reason for the flood, the length and the duration and the mechanism of the flood. You put it all together on every count. So it's not like on one count Gilgamesh sounds more real and the other count Moses sounds more real. It's on every count. I'm on the side of Moses with this. Yeah, Prima Scriptura, welcome. Yes, Rory, go ahead.
The reason why Muslims would say that the prophets did in the Bible, the prophets did disgusting, terrible, and abominable stuff. Like, let's take for David, for example. David committed adultery and then murdered someone, saying, put him on the front line of the battle, right? The reason why they would say that is because prophets are not just sinless, but they're supposed to be role models. Hence, because I've debated Muslims on Discord, I told them in the Bible, prophets in the Bible are not role models.
I was going to say, why should a prophet have to be a role model?
Well, no, they are to live up to a certain moral standard. Because if you're going to preach morality and you're a hypocrite, who's going to listen to you? But what the Bible is basically communicating is they're role models, but even the role models are not beyond right. Because if you think about, like, people talk about Israel really comes full on monotheistic and gets structured as a monarchy in the days of David. So that's why these things are written. Okay, well then your founding king, your records tell us, committed not only adult murder, premeditated, cold-blooded murder to steal a guy's wife.
Now, that I agree with, but is it possible that the myth was just simply transferred and then it becomes associated with Moses? If that makes sense.
Why not curate it after then? Why not sanitize it?
Good
Since
point.
your yard, right?
That I agree with. But I'm just saying, how can we see the genesis of it in the other story, or is it just a coincidence?
Or something happened that the branches of humanity have a common memory of, and they're each writing, and the Lord basically wants to make sure we got the story, and he gets Moses the real account.
That's a very interesting take.
That's...
Now, there is a question I do have for you, but I'm not going to ask it because I've asked far too many questions, and I need.
Oh, it's okay.
But I've really very much enjoyed it. What I would like to talk about on another occasion, if that's okay with you, is I would like to see what commonality there is across different religions that come not like this flood myth. Is there anything else? But I'm not expecting an answer now. That's a very deep and long
Sounds
question.
good.
But
yeah,
no,
it's very broad.
This has been a very interesting discussion. I've learned a lot today, and hopefully it's given you something to think about. And certainly it's been very impressive to see you at work and finding the references. Very much what I like to see. So thank you very much.
Well, the feeling is mutual, Jake, and hopefully we'll be on together on Mr. and Mrs. Friendly Ex-Muslim. He's open to the idea, so I hope it works out soon.
Oh, yes. Yes. I watched him the other day, actually. There's a young woman, I found her channel. She's called Ellie, and she's an ex-Muslim, but she's a convert. She was on, I think it was a couple of days ago, and her channel is really good. She doesn't post very often. It was yesterday. Yeah. She does quite philosophical talks with a Greek chap called Costas, and it's really interesting. If you like that kind of discussion, I think you'd like it. I'm sure it won't be as interesting as the debate with David Wood, though, that you sent me, which was very amusing.
I knew you'd like that.
I did. Was that really his face in the picture?
Yeah, well, that's no. No, that's just some random,
Because I sometimes click on Speaker's Corner's video just for a laugh, and I listen to hear his voice because I know he's on there because people have said in the comments, but I've never found him. So I need to know what his name is.
We're talking about Zach.
Zach, yeah.
The Zach attack.
What is it he calls himself now? Something analyst.
Yeah, logical analyst.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, I'll have to find out what his Speaker's Corner name is. But no, thank you very much, George. It's been a real pleasure, and I very much appreciate the knowledge that you have. And also, Rory, nice to see you again, and have a good evening. Take care, George.
Before you guys go, Mike, just add some more stuff onto what was presented.
Yeah, go ahead, Prima.
Brother Jake, I just want you, based on what I heard, the Brother Antonius was presenting, you can also look into the in the comparison that he showed. One of the things that always struck me, there are two items that has always struck me about the Genesis account that makes it separate from the rest if we want to do comparison. Number one is the population calculation from the estimated time of when it happened.
Yeah.
So that's one. And I'm guessing everybody could try to just do a basic math to say, if we are at 8 billion today,
that's right.
You know, what would be the time frame with all of the external parameters and scientific ones that you add? The numbers seem to more correlate biblically with, you know, with other versions or other suggested timelines as well. So that's one. One of the other interesting things that I tell folks look into the 16 sons of the children of Noah. It's I would say it would have to be pretty slick, like pretty good, even if you try to date the Bible in terms of the Torah when those information came out.
Yeah.
How is the author able to insert the proto-Genesis, let's say 16 grandsons of Noah, into the areas of occupation where the names still exist today?
That's good.
No, that is very good, very good.
Even some of the tribes, you go to the European, the Persian, the Africans, in those, you go east, you go south, you go north. It's like, wait, you can see the literal names. So how can they copy the names, insert them? But it's generations much later. And it's not like today in the internet where we can go on Google Maps and find stuff. You know, it's pretty, I mean, Moses got to be pretty slick to try to insert that and get it so correct that it matches the migration, it matches the language, it matches the demographics as well.
No, those are very, very good points, and thank you for raising them.
Yeah.
And And I think that, just to finish off on, isn't it a wonderful thing that you can have a critical discussion about a text and its history and look at various different angles and not end up shouting at each other and fighting and trying to hit each other and say that you're wrong and I'm right. It's a very civilized way to be. So
Yeah,
thank you very much.
we need dialogues and debates to learn and grow from each other.
Exactly. And it's not about somebody being right or wrong. It's just always about improving your knowledge, I think. And knowledge is, for me, the most important thing. I may find someday I move into something else being more important, my spirituality. But for now, it's knowledge. And like I say, I've learned a lot tonight. So thank you all very much and take care. I'll see you soon.
Fair enough. It's nice to have you, Jake. Prima Scriptura, I'm glad you're here. Is that your first time on Council and Might?
Yes, I think I may have come across your channel before, may have watched a video. I know Jake for sure. I've seen him on the Dawa channels, I think, maybe once.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe Speaker's Gone. I can't remember. I don't know if he's British.
Oh,
or
so
not.
you're in Britain also?
No, I'm not. I'm actually on the West Coast, and I'm actually from the Caribbean. So my
cool.
My speech would give it away.
Can you turn on the camera?
I do a lot of polemics, but I'm cool. Don't worry.
Gotcha.
I have a YouTube channel, so don't worry.
Okay.
No funny stuff. Trust me. I'm just a fellow Trinitarian, and I heard the conversation, and I enjoyed the critical comparison of the Gilgamesh and the. I've never heard it done that way before, so that would kind of struck me to kind of stay. And I said, let me join. But when I heard the brother speaking, I saw that. Had a little background of him. I know he's maybe not a Christian or not, but I could be wrong on that.
You're right. He's not. Yeah.
I think more agnostic maybe or something like that. Because
correct.
Yeah. So that's the only reason I sort of jumped in.
Yeah, but I appreciate Jake. He's an honest fellow, and you can talk to him. And he's thoughtful, and I think he's not far from the kingdom of God. So I'm excited. I pray for him. I'm praying that he gets saved. Him and Lubna. I think it'd be great.
Okay. Trust me, I'm in the same position as you. I have a small channel just as well that I do the same apologetics and polemics as well. And I do it with grace. Well, for those who don't know me now, you guys may know me. I'm just introducing myself. I do it similar to this forum, pretty, I try to be gracious, and I always say Christ-like, in the approach. I mean, people can get heated in discussions and things. That's a given. Yeah. But I always think it's let the Spirit lead, and let the Spirit impress somebody's understanding and wisdom. We can't beat people into Christianity or belief. That's the whole thing.
No, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Morgan is asking Jake, who the man that was just here, the agnostic, with whom we were discussing the veracity and reliability of the Genesis account. That's Jake. That's who that Jake is. I'm glad you jumped on, Prima. I'm gonna call it a day myself.
Okay.
It's almost
but I like the point. I saw the time. No problem. I'm gonna leave too. That's appreciated. But the it's the fountains of the deep. That's what the text says, right?
Yes.
And it is proven that the water beneath the surface is more than what is above, actually. So it's funny that is included in the text, because nobody would tend to think, okay, if there's water, it doesn't go back down or come back up.
And Bible believers have been saying there's water underground below the surface of the crust of the earth. We've been saying that for decades and decades and decades. Yeah. And I think last year is when the article came out.
Actually, I think the article was much older. I think what happened was that it was redone by a more, in quotes,
okay.
Yeah, it was sort of brought back up by a more known network. I think one of them was WeHorn, the more commercialized network, broadcaster networks. And I think I did see the one on WeHorn, for those who know that channel. I was like, oh, they actually picked it up. So yeah, go ahead, make the point.
Your name is Primary Scriptura. Is that different from Solo Scriptura?
Good question.
In terms of the name?
Yeah.
So it's the Latin for first scripture. So the name of my channel is First Scripture always. So when people say sola scriptura, it just means like Bible alone, but that comes with a whole belief system in terms of like if you're Protestant against the Catholics, you know, that sort of realm. So, but it's just the Latin name. Most people ask me what it means. There is a prima scriptura theology, but I just picked the name because I know what it represents to me. So, if you,
I think what Rory is trying to get at, if I'm not mistaken, is
yeah,
because when we say sola scriptura, we're saying that the scriptures are the only authority for all matters of faith and practice.
Right.
And when you say prima scriptura, so the scripture first, it kind of leaves the door open for other authorities. You're just saying that the scriptures supersede that, which in a lot of the context, there would be a difference practically between sola scriptura and prima scriptura, but in some places there could be a difference, especially in places where the scriptures are silent. That opens a door for like a side authority to come in. So I think, is that what you're trying to get at, Rory?
Yeah, I know what. And I've been asked the question if you met me for the first time, people just know that's basically not in terms of the name and the Latin theology that comes behind it. What I've told folks is what I've used in terms of even in my belief is not only the scriptures. And when I mean the scriptures, I believe that they are just like in the Genesis comparison that you have. In order to validate what scripture says, we have to go outside of scripture also to provide, which I use like archaeology, various what I would call secondary information that can confirm what scripture is saying.
Gotcha.
That's basically my position on it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's not from a thought trend of like, let's say, church commentators. So I don't use the church fathers, and no, I never do, never. So
gotcha.
I don't quote the other people, don't quote any of them at all. So yeah,
sounds good.
Yeah, okay, well, thanks for having me. I know you want to wrap up. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah, take care, Rory. God bless you. Thanks for coming on. Prima Scriptura, thank you for coming on. Everybody that participated, that was a lot of fun. I'm gonna have to split those videos. Ellen White, right? Is that what Ellen White? She's the one who says Prima Scriptura. Chris, I'll wait for you to give me the answer to that in the chat. That's interesting. Is that what? Is that SDA? Is that an SDA thing? Prima Scriptura instead of Sola Scriptura? That'd be interesting to know. So I'm going to have to split that video. The first part was about the Trinity, commenting on Denlinger's argument out of Hosea chapter 12, verse 4. That's interesting. I think the safer route to go is Sola Scriptura. But let's see. Every channel you're going to be a tool. The Protestant View, Live, Calm, On, Fanboy. I don't understand what that is. Every channel you're going to be a tool. Okay, so you guys have had some interaction. So Prima, maybe you can answer. Is Prima Scriptura, are you SDA? Is that an expression that Ellen G. White, is that what she argued for? She never used the exact term. Her writings were a lesser light. Okay, so I think so. It is. If I didn't want to waste my time, I could have answered one question asked within 4 hours of you. All right, guys, you can do that on your playground. Next time, we can talk here. God bless you. If you feel that I've earned your attention long enough, then I pray you consider liking and commenting and sharing. That helps the algorithm push it out. Remember, if you can, you need to get plugged into a biblical church that worships the Lord Jesus Christ, that takes the Bible for its only authority, and you're either called to be a pastor or to help a pastor. They need your help and encouragement. God bless you guys. Have a great day.